Let me tell you something I've never told anyone outside of my family. For the first 4 months, I dated the woman who would become my second wife. I let her believe I was a retired school bus driver living on a fixed income. I told her my truck was on its last legs. I told her I clipped coupons. I told her the small house I kept in Savannah was all I had in the world. None of that was true. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer before I retired at 59. I own the house in Savannah outright. I own a duplex in Augusta that I've been renting out for 11 years. I have a retirement account that would make most people's eyes go wide. My first wife, God rest her soul, and I built all of that together over 4 decades of careful living and quiet sacrifice. She passed from ovarian cancer 3 years before any of this happened, and not a single day goes by that I don't miss her. I want you to understand that I am not a suspicious man by nature. I am not the kind of person who plays games or sets traps, but my daughter, who is 34 and works as a paralegal in Atlanta, sat me down about a week after I told her I was seeing someone seriously. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Daddy, please just be careful. You have a lot to lose, and you've only known her a few months." My oldest friend, a man I've known since we were both in diapers back in Macon, told me almost the exact same thing. He said, "Eugene, I love you like a brother. But slow down." I told them both they were worrying too much. I told them she was different. I had met my second wife at a grief support group at my church. She had lost her husband 2 years before, or so she told me. She was warm. She laughed easily. She had a way of listening to you that made you feel like the only person in the room. She had a son from her first marriage, a 22-year-old who she described as a good kid going through a rough patch, trying to figure out his direction in life. By month 3, I was in deep. By month 4, I had convinced myself that what my daughter and my old friend were feeling was just protectiveness, not wisdom. I started to picture a second chapter. I started to think about not waking up alone anymore. But something kept nagging at me. Little things that didn't quite add up. The first time it happened, we were sitting on my porch in Savannah, watching the evening come in, and she asked me, completely out of nowhere, whether I had ever thought about selling the house and moving somewhere bigger. I told her I liked it just fine. She smiled and let it go. But I noticed she brought it up again 2 weeks later. A bigger place, more room, somewhere with more space for family. The second time something felt off was when she introduced me to her son. He shook my hand firmly enough, but there was something behind his eyes that I couldn't name then. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they haven't solved yet, not rude exactly, just calculating. He called me by my first name the very first time we met, which I know some people don't think is a big deal, but it told me something about how he had been raised and what he thought of boundaries. The third moment, the one that truly set off the alarm I had been ignoring, came about 6 weeks before the wedding. We were talking about the future in a general sort of way, the way couples do, and she mentioned, almost casually, that her son would probably need to move in with us for a while once we were married. Just temporarily, she said. Just until he got back on his feet. I asked what had happened to the apartment he was in, and she waved her hand and said something vague about the lease being up. I said we could talk about it. I did not say yes. That night, I sat in my kitchen for a long time after she went home. I thought about my daughter's face when I told her I was getting serious. I thought about my old friend's voice on the phone. I thought about my first wife, who had a gift for reading people that I never fully had, and I wondered what she would have said if she had been sitting across from me in that kitchen. I think I already knew. I called my attorney the next morning. I told him I was getting married, and I needed to make sure everything was in order. We had a long conversation. At the end of it, I had done something I probably should have done years earlier. Regardless, everything I owned, the house, the duplex, the retirement accounts, everything went into a trust. My daughter was named as the primary beneficiary. My attorney made it airtight. When I walked out of that office, I felt something that I couldn't quite identify at the time. I think now it was relief. I did not tell my soon-to-be wife about any of it. I also did not tell her that the bus driver story was a story. I kept that close to my chest, and I watched. I watched carefully. We got married on a Saturday in October, at a small ceremony in the church where we had met. My daughter stood beside me, quiet and loyal as she has always been. My old friend flew in from Macon and sat in the front row with his wife. It was a simple service. There was a small reception afterward at the church hall. Nothing extravagant, and by 8 o'clock that evening, we were back at the house in Savannah. I want to be clear about what happened next, because I know it sounds like something from a movie, and I wish I could tell you that I am exaggerating. 3 days after the wedding, not weeks, not months, 3 days, I came downstairs on a Tuesday morning to find my new wife sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting. Her son was sitting across from her. They both looked up when I walked in, and there was a half second where neither of them moved, the way people freeze when they've been caught in the middle of something. I poured myself a cup of coffee. I asked what they were working on. She told me they were just talking about some ideas, getting organized, planning ahead. Her son looked at me with that same flat expression from the first day we met and said, "We should really sit down and talk about the financial stuff soon, get everything sorted out. Not you two, not you all, we, as if you were already part of the equation." I sat down at the table. I looked at him steadily and asked what financial stuff he had in mind. What followed was one of the most remarkable conversations of my life. He spoke with a confidence that I found genuinely astonishing, given the circumstances. He talked about the house needing updates. He talked about how the Savannah property market was doing well and how selling might make sense now while prices were up. He talked about the duplex in Augusta, the duplex I had never once mentioned to either of them, and then caught himself and looked at his mother. I set my coffee mug down slowly. I asked him how he knew about the duplex. He said she had mentioned it. She had been looking into things. Just trying to understand the full picture, she said, to plan properly. I looked at my new wife. She looked back at me with an expression I can only describe as composed, not guilty, not embarrassed, composed, like she had prepared for this conversation and had decided this was as good a time as any to have it. She said she thought it was only fair, now that we were married, to talk about combining our finances. She said she had some debts she hadn't mentioned before the wedding, some things that had piled up, and she thought we should approach it as a team. She said her son deserved a stable foundation to build from, and that as his stepfather, I had the opportunity to give him that. Her son nodded along. I sat there for a moment. I thought about my daughter calling me the night before the wedding to tell me she loved me and she was proud of me and she hoped I was happy. I thought about my first wife and the 37 years she spent beside me, and the way we never once in all that time had a conversation where one of us tried to gain an advantage over the other. I thought about the quiet house in Savannah that she and I had filled with small, ordinary, irreplaceable memories. I thought about the trust documents sitting in my attorney's filing cabinet. I told my new wife I appreciated her honesty. I told her son I appreciated him being direct. I told them both that I had a few things to share as well, in the spirit of openness. I told them about the trust. I told them that every asset I owned had been moved into it before the wedding, that neither the house nor the duplex nor the retirement accounts were accessible to me in the way they seemed to be imagining. that my attorney had been thorough and deliberate, and that there was simply nothing to combine, nothing to restructure, nothing to leverage. I watched their faces as at all of this. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant in that moment, but I didn't. I felt tired and sad in a way I hadn't expected. Her son's composure cracked first. He pushed back from the table and said this was ridiculous. He said I had gone into the marriage hiding things. He said that wasn't right. The irony of those words coming out of his mouth in that kitchen on that particular morning was something I did not comment on. My new wife said very little. She sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. The warmth was gone. The easy laugh was nowhere near that room. She looked at me like she was reassessing something, recalculating, and I realized I was seeing her real face for the first time. She asked if I had been testing her. I told her I had been protecting myself. I told her that was not the same thing. She said she felt deceived. I thought about the legal pad covered in handwriting. I thought about her son knowing about a property I had never mentioned. I thought about the debts she had held back until 3 days after the ceremony. I thought about all the right moments she could have chosen to be honest with me and did not. I told her. I understood that she felt that way. She asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I needed a few days to think. I asked her and her son to give me some space in the house for the time being. She gathered some things and left that afternoon. Her son was out the door 20 minutes after she was. I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time after they left. The late afternoon light came through the window the way it always does, the way it did when my first wife used to sit right there and read her books on Sunday afternoons. The house was very quiet. My coffee had gone cold. I called my daughter. She drove down from Atlanta that evening, and we sat on the porch together until almost midnight. Not saying everything, just being near each other the way family is when the words aren't quite big enough. She did not say I told you so. She has never once in her life said I told you so to me, and I am more grateful for that than I have words for. What followed in the weeks after was painful in the procedural way that endings tend to be. Lawyers, paperwork, conversations I would rather not have had to have. My new wife hired someone to look for any angle she might have missed. There were none. My attorney had been meticulous. The marriage was brief enough and the circumstances clear enough that the process, while unpleasant, was not as long or complicated as it might have been. She tried once more, near the end of it, to reach me directly. She called me on a Wednesday evening, and her voice was different from the voice I had known before the wedding. Softer. The warmth dialed back up. The version of herself she had shown me at the grief support group. She said she thought we had both made mistakes. She said she missed me. She said she thought we could still build something if I was willing to try. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When she was finished, I told her that I genuinely wished her well. I told her I hoped she found peace and that she figured out a better way forward for herself and her son. I meant it. Carrying bitterness around is heavy work, and I am 63 years old and I don't have the energy for it anymore. But I told her no. I think about that whole chapter of my life more than I expected to, honestly. I don't tell this story to make myself look clever. I made plenty of mistakes in it. I ignored the early signs because I wanted to believe in what I was feeling. I moved too fast. I let hope outrun judgment. Those are my failures, and I own them. But I also think about what my attorney said to me the morning I sat in his office. The morning after the porch conversation, when I had finally listened to the voice inside me that had been quietly raising its hand for months. He said, "Eugene, protecting what you've built isn't suspicious. It's responsible." He said, "You spent 3 decades earning all of this. There is nothing wrong with making sure it's still there. I think about my first wife and what she always used to say about the difference between being trusting and being naive. She used to say that trust is something you build with someone over time, brick by brick, and that anyone who wants you to hand them the whole building before the foundation is even set isn't after a partnership. She was a wise woman. I should have listened to her voice in my head earlier than I did. My daughter came down to Savannah for Thanksgiving that year with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. My old friend and his wife drove over from Macon. We sat around the table in that quiet house and we ate and we laughed and my grandson fell asleep on my shoulder before dessert was even served. I looked around that table at those faces and I felt something that I can only describe as a fullness. Not perfect, not without grief or without the empty chair that will always be there, but full. There is a version of that night that doesn't exist, the version where I did not listen to my daughter, where I did not sit in the kitchen that one late night and finally take the nagging seriously, where I did not make one phone call to my attorney. In that version, the house might be gone by now. The duplex. The retirement account my first wife and I watched grow for 30 years. The foundation we built together so that our daughter and her children would always have something solid under them. I think about that other version sometimes and it makes something tighten in my chest. I am not writing this because I want sympathy or because I think my story is particularly special. I know it isn't. I have heard versions of it from friends, from men at church, from callers on programs like this one. It happens more than people talk about. Lonely people, good people. People who have spent their whole lives being generous and open-hearted, find themselves vulnerable in grief, and they get targeted by people who recognize that vulnerability and know exactly how to work it. What I want to say to anyone listening who might be in that early place I was in, when everything feels new and possible and the warnings from the people who love you feel like pessimism rather than wisdom. Please listen to those people. Not because love isn't real, or second chances aren't possible. They are. But because the people who truly love you, who have known you for decades, who sat with you through the worst seasons of your life, those people are not trying to take anything from you when they ask you to slow down. They are trying to make sure you still have something worth protecting when the right person does finally come along and protect your assets. I cannot say that plainly enough. Talk to an attorney. Set up a trust. Know what you have and make sure it is legally secured before you make any major life changes. It is not unromantic to do that. It is not a sign that you don't believe in the person you're with. Anyone worth building a life with will understand and respect it. Anyone who reacts to it with anger or pressure is telling you something important about what they're actually after. The house in Savannah is still mine. The duplex in Augusta is still mine. My daughter is still my beneficiary, and my grandchildren will still have something when the time comes. My first wife worked too hard for too many years for any of it to disappear in a season of loneliness and poor judgment. Some nights I sit on the porch, and I watch the light go, and I think about what it cost me to almost lose all of that. Not in dollars, though the risk was real. In something quieter, in self-respect, in the knowledge that I almost let grief make me someone my first wife would not have recognized. I am glad I listened, even if I listened a little late. I am glad my daughter is the kind of person who tells her father the hard things without making him feel small for needing to hear them. I am glad my old friend picks up the phone on the third ring no matter what time it is, the same way he has since we were young men with nothing in the world but our word and our friendship. Tonight I allowed myself to sit with gratitude for the house, for the trust documents in that filing cabinet, for the voice inside me that eventually got loud enough to hear, for the people around that Thanksgiving table who did not need to know what I owned before they decided I was worth showing up for. That, I think, is the only kind of wealth that truly matters. I just had to be careful enough to protect the other kind long enough to remember it.